Good evening.
Good evening.
And it's good to be here this evening.
It is great to be back.
It is nice to be here. Some people have accused us of lying because this isn't evening. This is morning.
Well,
but it's going to be on in the evening.
Right.
And so we're just adjusting.
We are, yes.
And so when you see this, it will be evening. And so that's why we say good evening, although it is morning when we're recording it.
That's right.
So is it okay?
It is okay.
Okay.
And isn't it actually afternoon?
No. Yes, it is.
Yeah, there we go.
It's barely afternoon. Good afternoon.
Okay.
How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. I think I'll be doing great Sunday evening too.
Okay, good. And I'm sure I will be. Last time it was because you asked me about my birthday the day before.
Right.
But when we recorded it, it hadn't happened yet. But I said it was great because I knew ahead of time it was going to be great because it's always great.
You just going by past performance.
I'm just going by past performance. Yeah. And so it was good. What are we going to talk about tonight?
Well, I think we're going to talk about some Proverbs.
Oh, that's a good idea. Why didn't we think of that before?
We should have started that already.
Okay, well, it's never too late.
There's probably a proverb about that.
There's probably a proverb about it. It's never too late to start the Proverbs. What Proverbs we're going to do tonight?
Oh, let's see. Chapters 10 through 13.
So you have to help me.
That's 4.
4 chapters. And so that means that you will do
2 of them.
2 and I'll do 3.
No.
You'll do 2 and I'll do
2.
You know, the new math you just can't keep up with because 2 and 2 used to be 4, but it's not anymore.
Well, it still usually is in my room.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad that at least is in your room and hopefully in a few other rooms that 2 plus 2 is 4. Yeah. Before we get into looking at the chapters, early on we discussed whether or not these Proverbs were all original with Solomon or whether they were things that had been handed down in their culture.
Right. Did he collect them or did he write them?
Right. And I think our answer was yes.
Yes. That
there's no question that God gave Solomon wisdom beyond what anybody else had. Mm-hmm. And so many of these had to come from his own wisdom, but there probably were some things that were passed down in their culture that he just repeated, maybe put in his own way,
sure,
maybe added to them. But this week as I was reading from the book of Job, in chapter 28, it says in verses 12 and 13, "But where can wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living." Mm-hmm. And if you go back and read more of that chapter 28 of Job, you'll see a lot of things that are similar to what we're reading in the Proverbs. Mm-hmm. He compares wisdom to things of great value. And so this was something I think existed long, long before Solomon came along.
I agree.
We've seen the contrast between the adulteress or the temptress and wisdom or the virtuous woman. Mm-hmm. And in Job 31:9, Job says, "If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or I have lurked at my neighbor's doorway, then let this happen to me." Mm-hmm. And there again, that's something that Solomon repeats in that contrast between those two women. And that adulteress is looking for somebody, but also this fool is lurking at her doorway. He's where he should not be.
Right.
And so I think these were ideas that were some of them were ideas that existed before. Mm-hmm. Amy ran across something this week in Jeremiah that I think reflects a lot of what we're finding in the book of Proverbs. And in Jeremiah 51:17, he says, "All mankind is stupid, devoid of knowledge." In fact, he makes that statement twice in Jeremiah. And I think that seems to be on Solomon's mind as he goes through these Proverbs. He has to come to the conclusion as he contrasts wisdom and foolishness that in the end, all mankind is stupid and devoid of knowledge.
You know, I think, isn't it also said, there is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death.
Is that in ours today, maybe?
Is it in there today?
I can't even remember that long.
It wasn't in one of mine.
It might have been in one of mine. If it's one of mine, I would have forgotten by now.
Yeah, but I think that kind of gets to the same point.
It does.
Mankind left to his own devices, the outcome is not good.
It does not go from good to better if we're left to our own devices. We're going to start, as you said, with Proverbs chapter 10. A good part of what we're going to see for the next several chapters involves contrasts. Mm-hmm. Usually it's so-and-so, but such and such, a contrast between the righteous and the wicked or something like that. Mm-hmm. Some of them have and some of them have other words to put them together. But basically what we're going to see for a while now is contrast. It begins right in chapter 10, verse 1. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, And then it says, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. And so we have this contrast between the wise son and the foolish son. The wise son makes his father glad, but a foolish son is grief to his mother. The next few verses focus on the work ethic. Ill-gotten gains do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord will not allow the righteous to hunger, but he will thrust aside the craving of the wicked. Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. And the contrast here is between ill-gotten gains that are not profitable and righteousness that is profitable. It delivers us from death. The Lord does not allow the righteous to hunger, but he does thrust aside the craving or the hunger of the wicked. Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent results in riches. And the one who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but the one who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. In verses 6 through 14 of Proverbs 10, Solomon seems to address morality. He says, blessings are the head of the righteous, or on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. The memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. The wise of heart will receive commands, but a babbling fool will be thrown down. He who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will be found out. He who winks the eye causes trouble, and a babbling fool will be thrown down. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all transgressions. On the lips of the discerning wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks understanding. Wise men store up knowledge, but with the mouth of the foolish ruin is at hand. There are all these contrasts there. The blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. The memory of the righteous will be blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. And that sure is a graphic example. The righteous is going to be blessed. Their memory is going to carry on, but the name of the wicked will rot. That's pretty graphic contrast. The wise of heart will receive commands, but a babbling fool is going to be thrown down. The one who walks in integrity walks securely. However, the one who perverts his ways will be found out. And then here's one of those ands instead of a but. One who winks with the eye causes trouble, and a babbling fool will be thrown down. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all transgressions. Wisdom is found on the lips of the discerning, but the rod is for the back of him who lacks understanding. And the wise men store up knowledge, but ruin is at hand with the mouth of the foolish. In Proverbs 10, 15, and 16, it talks about wealth. It points out that the rich man's wealth is his fortress. The ruin of the poor is their poverty. The wages of the righteous is life. The income of the wicked, punishment. And so the rich man's wealth is his fortress, and the ruin of the poor is their poverty. We also mentioned earlier that some of these are the ideal, but some of them just state reality.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not even necessarily a good thing, but this is just the way it is.
Right.
And I think some of these fell in that category of just that's the way it is. The wages of the righteous is life. The income of the wicked is punishment. In Proverbs 10:17, it goes to talk about instruction. He says that he is on the path of life who heeds instruction, but he who forsakes reproof goes astray. If we listen to instruction and even listen to correction, we're on the right path. But if we don't like being corrected, then we're going to go the wrong way. In verses 18 through 22, he addresses the tongue. He who conceals hatred has lying lips, and he who spreads slander is a fool. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the righteous is as choice silver. The heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of understanding. The one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and the one who spreads slander is a fool. Where there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but the one who restrains his lips is wise. Too often people just start running off at the mouth, and the more they talk, the worse it gets. But the one who knows when to speak and when not to speak demonstrates wisdom. The tongue of the righteous is as choice silver, but the heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many. Fools die for lack of understanding. In verse 22, he addresses true wealth. It is the blessing of the Lord that makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. So it is God's blessing that makes us rich, and then it just keeps getting better and better, because God does not add sorrow to the blessings he has given us.
Mm-hmm.
The fool is the opposite. The fool starts out bad and gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
The wise person that seeks God's blessing receives the blessing, and it just keeps getting better and better. And then he looks at the wicked in verses 23 through 25. Doing wickedness is like sport to a fool, and so is wisdom to a man of understanding. What the wicked fears will come upon him, and of the desire of the righteous will be granted. When the whirlwind passes, the wicked is no more, but the righteous has an everlasting foundation. Wickedness is like a pastime, just something that a fool does naturally. And wisdom is like sport to a man of understanding. He just does that naturally, so there's the contrast there. What the wicked fears will come upon him, and the desire of the righteous will be granted. And so there's really a contrast, two different things, but they have a similar outcome. What the wicked fears will happen, and what the righteous is looking for will be granted. So it's not a contrast, it's two things, a comparison, two things that go together. The wicked is no more when whirlwind passes, a little breeze and it's gone. But the righteous has a lasting foundation. It's kind of like the wise man and the foolish man building their house on rock. He talks about laziness in verse 26. And he says, like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy one to those who send him. So you have a job to do, and you send somebody, but you send a lazy person. And the result you're going to get from that lazy person is like vinegar to the teeth or like smoke to the eyes. We really don't do many object lessons here. Mm-hmm. And so I want to do an object lesson. I want to swish some vinegar in my mouth and see what it does to my teeth. And you're going to put smoke in your eyes and see how that feels.
I'd rather do the smoke than the vinegar.
You really would?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, I should have brought some matches.
Oh, I don't want to do either one. Though.
Yeah. I would rather swish a little vinegar in my mouth than blow smoke into my eyeballs.
Yeah.
But you're right. We really don't want either one of those. And that's his point. You send a lazy person to do a job for you, you might as well swish some vinegar and pour some and get some smoke in your eyes, because that's the result you're going to get.
Yeah.
And again, that's pretty graphic.
It is.
It's a good example. He turns then to the righteous in verses 27 through 32, where he says, the fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. The hope of the righteous is gladness, but the expectation of the wicked perishes. The way of the Lord is a stronghold to the upright, but ruin to the workers of iniquity. The righteous will never be shaken, but the wicked will not dwell in the land. The mouth of the righteous flows with wisdom, but the perverted tongue will be cut out. The lips of the righteous bring forth what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked, what is perverted. And you'd probably like to say something about this righteous and wicked in this passage, but you're going to save it till later on.
Well, I covered it already on Sunday, I think I did.
You did. You did. And then you're going to talk some more about it tonight.
We will.
And so, but just notice how often those words occur. The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked are short. Mm-hmm. The hope of the righteous is gladness, but even what the wicked expects perishes. The way of the Lord is a stronghold to the upright. It is ruin to the workers, but ruin to the workers of iniquity. The righteous will never be shaken, but the wicked will not dwell in the land. Out of the mouth of the righteous flows wisdom, but the perverted tongue will be cut out. And the lips of the righteous bring forth what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked, what is perverted. Proverbs chapter 11. What do we find in Proverbs chapter 11?
Okay, so in Proverbs chapter 11, I started noticing, and when you read through the Proverbs, it's beneficial if you can find common themes or common things that are repeated. And the more often you read it, the more you find those things, or the more connections you begin to make. But I noticed this, the very first read through in chapter 11 was that there was this repeating theme of the righteous and the wicked. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of started looking at that. And then as I looked at the chapters that were on either side and the chapters that were around those, it struck me that chapters 10 through 18 have basically the same chapter heading, at least in the New American Standard Bible. And that is contrast between the upright and the wicked. Mm-hmm. And so we have 9 chapters, I guess that would be, of Proverbs that are all about this contrast. One statement about the righteous, one statement about the wicked. And in some chapters, the words righteous and wicked occur often. In other chapters, they use a lot of different vocabulary words, but they're still talking basically about the righteous and the wicked. And so as I read through chapter 11, it struck me how often, first of all, the word righteous or upright or righteousness occurred just over and over in this chapter. And then as I began thinking, well, this is supposed to be a contrast, I went back and looked, and sure enough, the word wicked or wickedness shows up almost as many times as well. And so that's kind of what I want to key in as we read through this chapter. And you've done us a favor here of highlighting some words on the screen for us to show those words. So just take note of that as we read through. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. When pride comes, then comes dishonor, but with the humble is wisdom. With the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the falseness of the treacherous will destroy them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless will smooth his way, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the treacherous will be caught by their own greed. When a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of strong men perishes. The righteous is delivered from trouble, but the wicked takes his place. With his mouth, the godless man destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there is glad shouting. By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is torn down. He who despises his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding keeps silent. He who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals a matter. Where there is no guidance, the people fall, but in abundance of counselors there is victory. He who is surety for a stranger will surely suffer for it, but he who hates going surety is safe. A gracious woman attains honor, and violent men attain riches. The merciful man does himself good, but the cruel man does himself harm. The wicked earns deceptive wages, but he who sows righteousness gets a true reward. He who is steadfast in righteousness will attain to life, and he who pursues evil will bring about his own death. The perverse in heart are an abomination to the Lord, but the blameless in their walk are his delight. Assuredly, the evil man will not go unpunished, but the descendants of the righteous will be delivered. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion. The desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath. There is one who scatters, yet increases all the more, and there is one who withholds what is justly due, but it results only in want. The generous man will be prosperous, and he who waters will himself be watered. He who withholds grain, the people will curse him, but blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. He who diligently seeks good seeks favor, but he who searches after evil, it will come to him. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf. He who troubles his own house will inherit wind, and the foolish will be servant to the wise-hearted. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he who is wise wins souls. If the righteous will be rewarded in the earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner? Okay, so through that reading, we notice that the word righteous, upright, righteousness, those words appeared 15 times in this chapter. And so you've got to think that's a key central part of the book. And so then we could go in and we could pull in other words that basically are saying the same thing as, calling somebody names that are synonyms with righteous, and using those in place of these things and seeing them as well. But that word just keeps showing up over and over again. The outcome of being righteous then, as we read through that chapter, we saw that the righteous are guided by integrity. They're delivered from death. They're blameless. And then 3 times it says just that they are delivered, but it also says they're delivered from trouble. So as you kind of add those up, that idea of being delivered as an outcome of righteousness. And that's an appealing thing. When you think about what our greatest fears are in this life, is perhaps not being able to direct our own steps, or not being able to make our own choices, or having somebody force you to do or go or whatever, where you don't want to be or where you don't want to go. The idea of deliverance from that is a tremendous relief. And so what is it that can deliver us in a very real sense? Well, it's righteousness. It's doing what we're supposed to do, that God has called us to do. And that's going to deliver us from all kinds of trouble and difficulty in this life. And so that's one of the primary outcomes of righteousness. Included also on that list, that righteousness will cause rejoicing. It exalts a city. It gets a true reward. It attains life. The desire is only good. It will flourish. There is the tree of life, and it is rewarded in the earth. And so those are all just very positive things, very good things. A couple of them, that one, it exalts a city. That one kind of stands out to me as being something, if we could get people to act in a righteous way, it's not just individual rewards that we're talking about. It's communal rewards. It's how we affect society around us. And when people act in a righteous way and do things that are upright, then all of society benefits from that. Mm-hmm. So the word wicked then, wicked or wickedness, is used 9 times in this reading. And in stark contrast to the things that are said about those who are righteous or upright. And the outcome of wickedness is that they will fall. They will die. They will find trouble. People rejoice when they perish. They destroy cities rather than exalting a city. People who act wickedly are going to bring about the destruction of cities. And that stands in stark contrast to what it says about the upright. They will earn deceptive wages. They will receive wrath, and they are rewarded according to their works. So just pick any of those off that list. You talked about, do you want to have the vinegar or the smoke in your eyes? Which one of those do you want?
I choose none of the above.
I don't want any of those. Those are all horrible, horrible things. But all of those things are things that are brought about by wickedness. And sometimes we think of wickedness as being that which is, the pursuit of evil, those who are actively seeking out wickedness. And that definitely fits that category. But I think what we really need to understand is that this is what is in store for those who don't pursue righteousness. We don't get to remain neutral in this idea. We don't get to just say, well, choosing righteousness is too hard, so I'm not going to pursue that, but I'm not going to pursue wickedness either. I'll just stand in the middle. Well, there is no middle. We either pursue righteousness or this is where we're headed.
It's amazing how many people think that there are 3 paths. Mm-hmm. There's the real goody-goody path, and the real bad path, and then the great big path up the middle where most of us walk.
Yeah.
And that's not what Jesus describes. There are only 2 paths.
2, that's it.
And there's a narrow one that leads the right way, and if you're on the broad one, the wide one, where everybody else is, that's where you don't want to be.
Right.
And so that's a common misconception in the religious world and everywhere, is that there are 3 options, one for goody 2-shoes, one for Adolf Hitler, and then all the rest of us are kind of in between, going up the middle. And that's just, it doesn't hold up. And
we are all pursuing one of those outcomes. There is no standing our ground or just staying put.
No. And there's no fence to straddle.
Mm-hmm.
Then in Proverbs chapter 12, he begins by addressing discipline. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. Mm-hmm. If you love discipline, then you love knowledge. And again, we need to face correction and accept correction. It helps us grow, helps us be better. But if we hate that, if we don't like to be corrected, he just said you're stupid.
Right.
I don't know any other way to put it. If you don't accept honest, genuine correction given in love to try to make you better, and if you hate that kind of thing, then stupid.
There's a word for that.
There's a word for it. Again, we're going to see this contrast in this chapter between the righteous and the wicked. Mm-hmm. In chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, he says, "A good man will obtain favor from the Lord, but he, the Lord, will condemn a man who devises evil. A man will not be established by wickedness, but the root of the righteous will not be moved." So the good man is going to have the favor of the Lord, but God is going to condemn anybody who devises evil. We cannot be established by being wicked, but if we're righteous, we have roots that go down, mm-hmm. and they can't be moved. In chapter 12, verse 4, it talks about the wife, and it says, "An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is as rottenness to his bones." And I like this verse because I have one of those. Not the second one, I have the first one. I have the excellent wife is the crown of her husband. However, as we were watching last Sunday night's discussion, and we're talking about shysters who call people on the phone to try to trick them and taking all their money away, and I made a comment about them doing that to the elderly. My wife turned to me and said, "And that's you." The day after my 70th birthday. Now, she's still in her 60s, and so she's still young. But here I am in my 70s, so I fall in that category of them. They're shooting for me because I'm elderly. Right. But I do have the excellent wife, the crown of her husband. And we're going to get down to chapter 31. I don't know how this is going to work because I'm doing the even chapters and you're doing the odd chapters.
Why do you think I asked for the odd chapters?
We're going to have to flip a coin or divide 31 in half or something.
We could arm wrestle.
Because, it's talking about my wife, and it's talking about your wife, and so I don't know how we're going to work this out. But anyway, here in chapter 12, verse 4, it just simply says, an excellent wife is a crown of her husband, but the one who shames him is as rottenness in his bones. And again, another very graphic example of having rotten bones, and that's what it's like. We get back to the righteous and the wicked in verses 5 through 9. The thoughts of the righteous are just, but the counsels of the wicked are deceitful. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. A man will be praised according to his insight, but one of perverse mind will be despised. Better is he who is lightly esteemed and has a servant than he who honors himself and lacks bread. And I think we mentioned once before that these flip-flops, sometimes it has the negative and the positive, and sometimes it has the positive and the negative. Right. You see that here. The thoughts of the righteous are just, but the counsels of the wicked are deceitful. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. Again, just over and over that idea of the wicked are going to vanish, but the righteous are founded. They have their roots there, and they're going to stand. A man is praised according to his insight. The one of perverse mind will be despised. And then this next one isn't really a contrast. It uses better than. It's better to be lightly. The one who is lightly esteemed and has a servant is better than the one who honors himself and lacks bread. Mm-hmm. It's better if you do what you're supposed to do and you take what you have and you're satisfied with it, than trying to pat yourself on the back when you really don't have what you think you do. Mm-hmm. In verse 10 of chapter 12, it talks about cruelty, and it says, a righteous man has regard for the life of his beast, but the compassion of the wicked is cruel. And it's a contrast between having regard for an animal and being cruel to an animal. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty well accepted now that a good many of the mass murderers, the serial killers, the people who are guilty of sexual crimes, somewhere in the past have been cruel to animals, have abused animals. I don't guess necessarily everybody who abuses an animal turns out to be a mass murderer, but the other way seems to be the truth, that the people who end up being very cruel people have a background of not having a regard for their animals. And so it's amazing that Solomon and the Holy Spirit was even concerned about that, because they made a one-to-one connection there about people who have regard for animals and those who are cruel to animals. In verses 11 through 14, it talks about fruitfulness. It says, he who tills his land will have plenty of bread, but he who pursues vain things lacks sense. The wicked desires the booty of evil men, but the root of the righteous yields fruit. An evil man is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will escape from trouble. A man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his words, and the deeds of a man's hand will return to him. I guess we could have even categorized this as work ethic, as we did before, but it's fruitfulness. The one who tills his land has plenty of bread. The one who pursues vain things lacks sense. The wicked desires the booty of evil men, but the root of the righteous yields fruit. The evil man is ensnared by transgressions of his lips, but the righteous will escape from trouble. The man should be satisfied with the good by the fruit of words, and the deeds of a man's hand will return to him. So that's and where both are good things. He then goes on to fools in verses 15 and 16. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. So there's that idea of a fool is right in his own eyes. The fool's vexation is known at once, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. Any fool thinks he's smart, thinks he's right, but a wise man listens to other people. And a fool's vexation is obvious, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. He doesn't go around just saying everything that needs to be said. And that kind of ties in with the tongue in verses 17 through 19. He who speaks truth tells what is right, but a false witness tells deceit. There's one who speaks rashly, like the thrust of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips will be established forever, but a lying tongue is only for a moment. The one who speaks truth tells what is right. A false witness tells deceit. That's in the titles. Mm-hmm. One who tells truth and one who's a false witness. One who speaks rashly is like the thrusts of a sword, but the tongue of the wise bring healing. Truthful lips are established forever, but a lying tongue is only for a moment. For the rest of chapter 12, I couldn't do any better than just labeled as various because it just jumps around.
Sure.
And so the rest of the chapter I just had under the heading of various. In verses 20 through 24, it says, deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy. No harm befalls the righteous, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal faithfully are his delight. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaim folly. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the slack hand will be put to forced labor. There is deceit in the heart of those who devise evil, but the counselors of peace have joy. No harm befalls the righteous, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. I don't know how many times it talks about, the things that God hates, all the way to Revelation. What happens to liars in the lake of fire. God cannot lie. Just over throughout the Old and New Testament, we find that lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. He doesn't put up with them. Those who deal faithfully are his delight. The prudent conceals knowledge. He knows when to talk and when not to talk, but the heart of fools just spout off anything. Mm-hmm. The hand of the diligent rule, but the slack hand is put to forced labor. And then from verses 25 through 28, it says, anxiety in the heart of a man weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. The righteous is a guide to his neighbor, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. A slothful man does not roast his prey, but the precious possession of a man is diligence. In the way of righteous is life, and in its pathway there is no death. Anxiety in the heart weighs it down, but a good word lifts it up, makes it glad. The righteous helps his neighbor as a guide to his neighbor, but the way of the wicked leads astray. And it gets back to those two women we talked about before. They both were actively pursuing people, but for opposite reasons. Wisdom was wanting to save them, and the adulterous woman was wanting to destroy them. A slothful man does not roast his prey. He doesn't even take time to cook his food. He's too lazy to cook his food. But the precious possession of a man is his diligence. In the way of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death. And that brings us to chapter 13.
Chapter 13. So once again, we're still in this cycle of the contrast between the righteous and the wicked. And in this chapter, it's just a potpourri of various words and vocabulary terms that are used to over and over point out the righteous. And then there's a contrast with what happens to the wicked. And they don't, we find a little cohesion from here and there, and a couple of verses that kind of go together, but really it's just kind of all a various, like mm-hmm. your conclusion to 12 was. So we'll go through this chapter and then just point out some connections that we can make. And as we go through this chapter, there's a couple of verses that we'll stop and make some commentary on that kind of stand out as being a little different than the verses around them, and maybe not seeming to follow the pattern, but we'll talk about why they do follow the pattern of the things that we're talking about. So we'll jump right in here. It says, a wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. From the fruit of a man's mouth he enjoys good, but the desire of the treacherous is violence. The one who guards his mouth preserves life. The one who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the soul of the diligent is made fat. A righteous man hates falsehood, but a wicked man acts disgustingly and shamefully. Righteousness guards the one whose way is blameless, but wickedness subverts the sinner. There is one who pretends to be rich, but has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, but has great wealth. The ransom of a man's life is his riches, but the poor hears no rebuke. The light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked goes out. Through presumption comes nothing but strife, but with those who receive counsel is wisdom. Wealth obtained by fraud dwindles, but the one who gathers by labor increases it. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. And there's one that I want to stop for just a minute and talk about that last one. The idea that hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. And that almost makes it, the way it's worded, and I don't know if I don't do Hebrew, but I wonder if it's worded feels different in Hebrew than it does in English. But in English, it almost makes it sound like hope is a passive thing. Like gumdrops and popsicles are what we're hoping for. And if we get those things, then great. If we don't, if it doesn't happen to come our way, then we're sad about that. But this really is not this really fits in with what we're talking about, the contrast between righteous and wickedness. That's what we're talking about. And so hope deferred makes the heart sick. Well, if you hope for something and you really, really want it, the natural next step then is to go work to get it, to go reach out and try to get that thing that you hope for. And so if you don't work for it, then your heart is sick because you're never going to get that which you don't work for. But then the idea that desired fulfilled is a tree of life, well, that's righteousness. When we go after those things that we're supposed to go after, when we set those things in our heart that we're supposed to put in our heart, wisdom and righteousness and faithfulness and goodness and compassion and those things, and then we work toward those things, then it becomes a fulfilling life for us. So continuing on then with the chapter, it says, the one who despises the word will be in debt to it, but the one who fears the commandment will be rewarded. The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, to turn aside from the snares of death. Good understanding produces favor, but the way of the treacherous is hard. Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool displays folly. A wicked messenger falls into adversity, but a faithful envoy brings healing. Poverty and shame will come to him who neglects discipline, but he who regards reproof will be honored. Desire realized is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to fools to depart from evil. He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Adversity pursues sinners, but the righteous will be rewarded with prosperity. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. Abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor, but it is swept away by injustice. And there's another one I want to stop at for just a moment and take note of this verse. Abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor, but it is swept away by injustice. And again, reading this through in English as it is here, it makes it sound as though those who are poor are the victims of some injustice that they've had no control over. But remember the contrast that we're talking about here. We're talking about righteousness and wickedness. And so abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor. And I think this would go under the heading, as you've mentioned in a couple of the previous chapters, the idea of being lazy. There's food out there to be found in the ground if you are willing to go out there and work for it. If you're willing to till the ground, plant the seed, take care of the plant until it produces, and then go out and harvest the food is there. But being the idea of it being swept away by injustice, later on in the book, we'll get to a proverb that says, the sluggard is not willing to go out into the street because there might be a lion out there. And there's all kinds of excuses that we can come up with about why we're not going to go out and do the work that needs to be done. And for the lazy person, for the sluggard, those are all injustices. For some reason that is beyond their control, I can't go do the work that everybody else around me is doing. There are people that are out there taking care of the ground and getting the food and those things. But, for some reason that's beyond my control, I can't go out and do it. When really what they need to do is just go out and get to work. And I understand that there are people who suffer, and there are people that we need to help take care of that don't fall under this category that really do need our care. But there are also people that have the opportunity but choose not to. And so that's what this is counseling against, is those who could go out and take care of themselves and just are not willing to do so. And then we'll read then to the conclusion of the chapter, the last couple of verses. It says, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. The righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the stomach of the wicked is in want. So there we have, again, a much broader vocabulary used than in chapter 11, where I was last kind of taking the lead and where we really caught in on those words for upright and wicked. Here, there's just a vast number of words that are used, but they still describe both categories, both upright and wicked. And so we just got to keep that in mind as we read through and understand which category each one of them falls under. And then almost every verse in that chapter had the conjunction but in it. There was a clear contrast. There were one or two ands, but for the most part, all of them were buts. And so there's a clear contrast between that negative outcome of the wicked and the positive outcome of the righteous. And again, we've talked about this over and over, but so when something repeats like that over and over and over, multiple chapters in a row, then we need to just really understand that that's what God wants us to know. And it may seem like we're beating a dead horse here, but there's just so much to learn from each one of these. There's so many specific life scenarios and life categories that each one of these fall under. That every one of them, even though we could say in one sense it's repetitive, every one of them sheds just a little different light on it. So let's pick out a few that are similar. We've got some common themes or vocabularies that are used through this chapter. The first one I noticed was in verses 2 and 3, where it talks about the mouth. It says, "From the fruit of a man's mouth he enjoys good, but the desire of the treacherous is violence. The one who guards his mouth preserves his life. The one who opens wide his lips comes to ruin." And it's interesting as you read through the book of Proverbs, if you just read it start to finish, especially those chapters 10 through 30, it seems like every verse could stand on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But then you come to little couplets like this, or 2 or 3 or 4 verses in a row, where it seems like all of a sudden maybe Solomon had the idea, hey, these kind of go together. I'll put these next to each other because they fit with one another. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that might be a spot there where he did that, where it talks about the lips and the mouth. Then in verses 7 and 8, 11, 21 through 22, we have the topic of wealth. It says, "There is one who pretends to be rich but has nothing. Another pretends to be poor but has great wealth." Why would somebody pretend to be rich?
Just to put on a big show. They're not going to go to the work to be rich,
Right.
But they just want everybody to think they're rich.
Is there a story in the New Testament about somebody who pretended to be rich and took some wealth and it didn't last very long?
There are lots of stories
And
like that.
the prodigal son found out that when his money ran out,
Yeah, he spent it all, and he wasn't rich. He was rich for a little while, but he wasn't really rich. He was,
right? And soon he had nothing.
Yeah, and he was less than nothing.
Yeah, and then others pretend to be poor, but really they house great wealth. There's a story about a widow that on the outward appearance was very poor,
Yeah.
but when she gave all that she had, we're still talking about her 2,000 years from later, because she
A very rich woman.
she gave out of her poverty, but really she was very wealthy.
Yeah.
It's maybe somebody in maybe the Corinthian church as well.
Yeah.
Was known for their giving. The ransom of a man's life is his riches, but the poor hears no rebuke. Wealth obtained by fraud dwindles, but the one who gathers by labor increases it. And that's maybe one of the most practical proverbs that we'd come across. Hard work is going to pay off, and people who obtain by fraud, eventually
It pays off too.
It's going to dry up and blow away.
Yeah.
And pays off in different ways. Adversity pursues sinners, but the righteous will be rewarded with prosperity. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. What do you think that means, the idea of the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous?
How often do people accumulate a great fortune, and when they're gone, it goes to somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
Right. You can't take it with you. You may think you can,
Exactly.
but regardless of what you do here on earth, you can store up all the wealth that you want, but it's going to go to somebody else.
It's going to go to somebody else, and then the idea too that those who are living frugally and is that a word, frugally?
Mm-hmm.
Those who are living frugally and who are making good choices when it comes to their finances end up in a position to where they are able to accumulate the things that more foolish people end up having to sell off,
mm-hmm.
or end up not being able to maintain or take with them or whatever. And so there is a long-term payout for those who behave righteously versus what may seem like a payout for the sinner, but it's a short-term payout. And so we're counseled there on that contrast. There is also a theme of laziness in this chapter. In verses 4, 12, and 23, we've got the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the soul of the diligent is made fat. The sluggard craves and he wants, but he never receives it because he's not willing to go work for it. But the diligent receives that which they work for. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. And then abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor, but it is swept away by injustice. There are those relating to the theme of laziness. We also have a common theme of one who is willing to accept reproof or counsel. In verses 1, 9, 10, and 18, it says, "A wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. The light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked goes out. Through presumption comes nothing but strife, but with those who receive counsel is wisdom, and poverty and shame will come to him who neglects discipline, but he who regards reproof will be honored." Proverbs has a lot to say about those who are willing to be corrected. There's such a contrast between just the willingness to listen, the willingness to accept counsel is such a big idea in Proverbs.
And I'm sure you've experienced it, but every teacher that has experienced it, if you're trying to explain something to a child, how often they become defensive and try to explain to you why they did what they did instead of just listening to what you're trying to tell them.
Sure.
And we should be willing to listen to instruction, and if it's good, take it. If it's not, don't worry about it. But we should at least be open to listening to instruction. Do we have any questions for this?
Well, yes, we've got some questions here. We basically, what do these chapters teach us about each of the following things?
And we tried to come up with some categories. And a lot of what we're going to see in the Proverbs would fall under one of these categories. There was another one that we didn't see quite so much today. It was in a couple of places, but it has some instruction about nations, kings, and so that would be good to listen to for us. And so that's one category we'll probably pick up, but it wasn't real common in these chapters. And so what do these chapters teach us about our work ethic or fruitfulness or our wealth? You get into the laziness and all those things. What do they teach us about morality, that contrast between righteousness and wickedness? What do they teach us about wisdom and about instruction? What do they teach us about discipline, about correction? How do we react when we don't like the word discipline, but the word disciple has the same root. And so if you want to be a disciple, you're going to have to have some instruction, some guidance along the way. And so what do these chapters teach us about discipline? What do they teach us about the tongue? And what do they teach us about the family? So those are some of the categories that we came up with. And we'll add a few more next week probably. But what do these chapters, and that'd be a good way to go through the whole book of Proverbs, is just as you go along, just make a note of what that couplet says about whatever this topic is. Will you be able to be back next week?
I will.
I think I will. Today we did 10, 11, 12, and 13. So next week we're going to do
14, 15, 16,
and
17.
And so if people read less than a chapter a day,
less than a chapter a day, 4/7
of a chapter every day, that's just barely over half a chapter
That's
a day.
barely over half.
They'll be able to cover that whole
come out
thing.
to about 12 or 15 verses a day.
It doesn't get much easier than that. So hopefully they'll take time to read those next chapters, and they can even sit down with a piece of paper and make some notes about these things here.
Right.
And that'll be great.
That would be great.
Okay. We'll see you next week, Lord willing.
See you next week.
All right.